Figures released last week show that UK house prices have declined for the first time in 12 months. But before you get all excited about buying a cheap house prices have only dropped 0.1%. And our average house price over here in the UK is still £293,221.
Oh damn!
But could this be very early signs of a halt in home buyer demand and a stagnating property market? After all, inflation is burning a hole through our pockets and interest rates are on the climb again. Well, in today's video, it really doesn't matter whether you are an existing homeowner, a first-time buyer, or even perhaps someone in rented accommodation. Today we're going to be discussing the UK property market and the issues and challenges that it faces, along with whether this property market bubble is about to burst. Now before we get started guys, all I really ask is that you drop a like on this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel as well if you're new around here, and with that being said, let's begin. So look, you guys know the story right now. Houses are really expensive. We've seen double-digit property price growth in the past 2 years, and the quest for home ownership is becoming ever more difficult amongst young people. In actual fact, the average age for a first-time buyer now is 34 years old. But considering over 60% of you guys currently subscribed and watching this video are likely to be under the age of 34, I think it's certainly a very important topic to talk about. And I think it's equally important to discuss some of the potential options that we have to give us the best possible chance of actually getting onto the property ladder. So to understand all of this and to understand where we are now, sometimes it's easier to actually look back in the past to understand where we could potentially be going in the future. So firstly, let's talk facts and figures by starting off with property prices. Now looking back as far as UK land registry data goes, the average house price all the way back in October 1968 was just, and wait for it, £3,696. So for what you could buy a house for over 50 years ago, in today's money, you could literally only afford to buy a rattling old Toyota Aygo. In actual fact, in percentage terms, the average price of the UK property has actually gone up 7,833%. And that's certainly an investment return that even Warren Buffett would be proud of. Now, whilst this level of growth has certainly benefited the homeowners of the past 50 years or so, it's certainly where the problem lies today for all of the aspiring homeowners out there. Because as every single month goes by, existing homeowners are enjoying the gains in the valuations of their properties, but it's made home purchasing even more difficult for everybody else who's yet to get on the property ladder. And look, I'm certainly not complaining because I was fortunate to be able to afford to buy a home back in 2019. But despite just about being able to do that, obviously with the help of my girlfriend of course, I do certainly understand the struggle. Which leads me on to talk about one of the main struggles that most first-time buyers have, and that's the size of the house deposit. For the most part, banks want to see at least a 10% down payment on a property, which for your average house price would be 29,321 quid. When you add all your legals, your mortgage fees and everything else on top of that, you're not going to get much change out of probably about £32,000, and that's before you even get on to looking to furnish the property as well. Now unless you've got access to the bank of mum and dad, then the chances are if you're just the average person working an average job, it's going to be very difficult to come across that level of surplus cash, which is certainly where we have the first problem. Average incomes can't afford average house prices because house prices are certainly going up far quicker than everybody else's incomes. Now for context, the average salary here in the UK is about £31,447. Now when we look at doing a mortgage affordability check or an agreement in principle, it appears that on an average income you could look to borrow somewhere in the realms of £149,000. With that level of income, you can only actually afford half of your average house price here in the UK. So certainly nowhere near what you'd actually need in order to be able to afford your own home. But I guess to be somewhat more of a matter of fact, if you do have aspirations to own your own home, then you're probably going to have to make some sacrifices. You might have to look to start to really focus on building your income, or at least for the bare minimum starting to cut back on your costs. Now to help with that, there are some things that you can actually look to do in order to help out your own situation, and that's not to actually cut back on your £4 Starbucks caramel frappuccinos, despite the fact that some personal finance gurus probably beg to differ. And instead, one of the first practical things that you can look to do is actually open something called a lifetime ISA account. It's an account where you can actually pay in up to £4,000 per year, the equivalent of just over £300 a month. And the government will generously top you up with an additional 25%, or the equivalent to £1,000 per year. Now when interest rates on bank accounts for the most part are still shit, and with inflation running at 9.4%, it is without doubt in today's climate one of the easiest ways to actually grow the value of your money by 25% per year. Because if you're able to do this, then within 6 years you should have all of the money together to be able to afford the average house deposit. And if you do this between you and a partner, then it'll only take 3 years. But if you haven't got a partner, then you're probably going to want to get on Tinder and start swiping. Other than that, I feel like that's probably the most realistic thing to tell you guys. So I could come on here and start spouting about you should be looking to start a business or a side hustle or whatever it may be. And whilst that certainly might help, I certainly do appreciate that it's not quite as easy and realistic and achievable to actually juggle all of these things all at one time. Now, whilst we're talking about things that aren't necessarily realistic, the next sticking point for first-time buyers is monthly outgoings. Now, I think it's fairly wild to say that as of April 2021, so this data is actually a little bit old now, but the average monthly mortgage payment was £753, which is 31% higher than what it was just 10 years ago. Now, the reason why I say this is wild to think about is because I've had conversations with my grandparents who said that their mortgage payments when they first bought their property was £1 per week. Whereas nowadays you can barely buy a can of Coke for £1. We're kind of getting to the point where money has kind of lost all sense of meaning, with valuations at absolutely outrageous levels. And I think there's even more frustration when you think that the banks will tell the average individual or the average couple that they can't afford the mortgage on a property. Yet that same individual or same couple are actually paying an average rental rate of £821 per month, which is close to £100 a month more to the average mortgage repayments. So individuals of today can actually afford to rent a property but can't afford to buy one, despite the fact that the average monthly costs are actually higher to rent than they are to buy. That, for me anyway, certainly seems somewhat ridiculous. Now, in my opinion, obviously when you apply for a mortgage, you have to show kind of 3 months worth of pay slips in order to prove that you can actually afford the mortgage repayments. But for those who perhaps can't afford to come up with the £30,000 deposit, because as I said, house prices are at absolutely outrageous levels, I think banks should certainly look to alter their risk appetite somewhat, and let's say that that same couple that was looking to apply for a mortgage, as part of the overall due diligence and overall checks, could prove that they've reliably paid 12 months worth of rent, that banks could potentially look to actually drop the overall deposit amounts from perhaps 10% to down to 5%. With policies like that, I think I should certainly be getting a call from the UK government, but somehow I don't think that's going to happen. And what's even worse, because properties are actually becoming so unobtainable, you've got these multi-billion pound banks that are actually now looking to purchase properties themselves and operate them as private landlords. So now not only is it an uphill battle to actually generate the level of income to be able to afford a property, along with have all of the surplus cash just to put down a deposit, but you're now also competing with multi-billion pound organisations that are equally stripping away the supply of properties in a property market that's already tight on supply. I hate to be a cynic, but all of this feels somewhat rigged in the next 10 to 20 years to very much reach the overall vision of the World Economic Forum, which is that you'll own nothing and be happy. Because all of the major assets will slowly be bought over time by big corporations and the most wealthiest of people, whilst everybody else will simply just look to rent or lease. And unfortunately, there's no real solution for that, because home prices have gone from 3 to 4 times income back in the day to now you're looking at 8 to 9, in some places in London over 20 times the level of income. And as of right now, property prices are at the most expensive point on record. So I guess the overriding question here is, will the property market come crashing down? Well, it's possible, but it might not be a prolonged market crash, because even if we consider that the UK property market fell 15% during a financial crisis of 2008, it only actually took the property market about 4 years to actually completely recover, and therefore there was only a very short window of opportunity for you to capitalize. And what's even more unfortunate is, as all of the historical data tells us, house prices have actually pretty much remained on an upward trend for the past 50 or 60 years. Because since 1968, there's only been 2 occasions where the property market has crashed and property prices have actually gone down in value. And those 2 occasions were back in the very early 90s, along with in 2008, as I've already said. So it's very possible that we may not see any major property market crash at all. Perhaps we might see a stagnating property market where property prices aren't growing as rapidly as they once were, or perhaps even a period of time where property prices remain fairly stable. But I think regardless, looking into the future, house prices are only ever going to continue to go higher, and buying a property for first-time buyers will only ever become more difficult. I think the only way to actually overcome this is to drastically increase the supply of property in the market, but without that, the longer that time goes on, the more difficult it will be to actually obtain a property. So I think they are some of the fundamental issues surrounding the property market right now that the UK government should address, but be sure to let me know what your thoughts are down in the comment section below. Now, if you found that video interesting, guys, I also made another one on the UK property market, which you can look to check out here. With that being said, I'll see you over in the next one.